Good day, everyone. I know people are logging in from different parts of the world, so it's good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are, you're welcome to this very important session today. Um, the topic for today's session is integrating and reinforcing the gender dimension in security and defense structures. My name is Hafsat Abiola, and I'll be the facilitator of today's panel. I'm the president of Women in Africa, a global organization that identifies and promotes the economic empowerment of women and girls in every African country. But I think that for me, my reasons for being part of a session like this and for facilitating this conversation is more personal. On the 4th of June, we marked the 25th anniversary of my mother's assassination in Nigeria during the fight for democracy in my country. She had been one of the leaders, and she had been gunned down on the streets of my capital, the commercial capital of my country, Lagos. So for me, the issue of security and safety for women, especially, is very pertinent and very personal. I'm so excited and exhilarated, really, to have just an outstanding panel. People who have so much experience and have been working on this issue at the very top levels in some of the very best academic institutions. And I've had the opportunity to think about this question of how we reinforce the gender dimension in security and defense structures. So the much of this conversation is going to be you listening to them. But before they have the floor to speak, I want you to know their brilliance. And so I'm going to offer their brief bios. But if you want their fuller bios, I invite you to look on the program in the program of today's conference, and you'll find their their full bios. So let me start with General Birame Diop, who has just been appointed by the United Nations to serve as the military advisor in the Department of Peace Operations. General Diop is responsible for advancing the work of military components in peace operations and to strengthen the partnership in troop contributing countries. He brings with him over 30 years of military experience and is currently serving as the Chief of Defense Staff of the Senegalese Armed Forces. General Diop, you're most welcome. Also joining us today is Dr. Jakana Thomas, who joins us from the United States. And if in case there's any problem with hearing her, it's because she's in the middle of a storm, but she's going to try her best to be with us. And as you see, she's able to be with us right now. So Dr. Jakana is an associate professor at the School of Global Policy and Strategy at the University of California, San Diego, and she sits on the Resolve Network's Research Advisory Council. Our research focuses on political violence with an emphasis on the gender dimensions of violent, non-state armed groups. Recent projects examine women's participation in rebel, terrorist, and community-based violent organizations, how violence influences conflict resolution, and the determinants of successful peace processes. You're welcome, Dr. Thomas. And next, Dr. Sampala Balima is on the program, but she will not be able to join us because she had an emergency. So I will go directly to Colonel Ibrahim Diarra. Colonel Ibrahim Siratigui Diarra, who comes to us from Mali. Is an officer scholar. He holds a master's in international relations, a bachelor's in law and criminal sciences, a master's in information technology, communication and development, yet another master's in peace and security studies, and yet another master's in counterterrorism and international security studies. His professional experience is as varied as his degrees. They include serving as Director of Peacekeeping Documentation Center and as Chief of Staff to the Commissioner responsible for Political Affairs, Peace and Security at ECOWAS. For those of you who don't know, the ECOWAS is the regional body for the West African countries. He served as Chief of Staff to both the former Prime Minister and President of Mali, and he now consults on peace, conflict and security issues to a wide range of companies and organizations. Jonna Naumanen joins us from Finland. She's a gender equality and human rights expert with a master's degree in anthropology, and she currently works with the OSCE, where she manages a portfolio on gender equality and human rights with a focus on the defense sector. Prior to joining the OSCE, she worked for 10 years for the United Nations, including the UN Department of Peacekeeping Operations, where she led the integration of gender and human rights into UN military policies, doctrine, and training. She's also worked with UN Women, where she managed their regional program on women, peace, and security in the Arab states. She formerly worked also for the ILO, supporting integration of gender equality in post-conflict infrastructure development in East Timor and women's employment and labor market policies in Vietnam. So I'm sure you will agree with me that this is really an outstanding panel. And now I'd like to invite our speakers to make their opening statements, beginning with General Diop. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Abiola. Let me first of all say how sorry I am to hear what you went through personally, and pray for our mother and our father to rest in peace. And let me also say thank you to my co-panelists. I am very happy to be part of this panel today. I can say that this is a gender day for me because I am in Spain, where this morning I was speaking about the same topic. It's important to me because it's about the future of our world. It's about the security of our world. It's about the stability and therefore about the development of our world. The integration and the reinforcement of the gender dimension within the security sector and within the defense sector is key. Why? I think you will all agree with me that nowadays we are very thankful to see the trend that is going on worldwide. There are a lot of positive developments taking place in almost all sectors, where people have taken more consciousness about the necessity to integrate the gender dimension, be it in the political arena, be it in the educational arena, and in many other arenas. Here in Spain, things are moving very, very, very fast. And we see women at very high level of responsibility in all sectors. The same is true in many Scandinavian countries, many African countries. We can share the experience of Rwanda. And the security sector cannot be left aside. The security sector should also make sure that the gender dimension is integrated in whatever this sector is undertaking. I also think that the gender integration is at the epicenter of the development of all sectors. You cannot develop your sector while setting aside more than half of the population. The security sector cannot improve, cannot have good performance, cannot deliver the way we all expect if we don't make sure that men and women together, hand in hand, are working within this very important security sector to move things forward. So it's a development issue, it's a performance issue. it is also a human rights issue. The security sector should create the conditions that allow both to men and to women to serve their country equally without being discriminated. If we don't create the conditions that can open the doors to all men and women, we are being discriminatory. And this is not acceptable. Not only we are being discriminatory, but also we are not creating the strong civil-military relations we need to make sure that the security sector is performing well. Because you cannot work for a population with which you do not maintain good relationship. It is also known nowadays that the gender integration within the security sector is an operational issue. Why? It's because if we create harmonious conditions that allow both men and women to perform at their best, we will have a better collective intelligence. We will perform better than if we were only men or if we were only women. Because men can bring things based on their sexual specificities, women will never be able to bring. Women can bring things based on their sexual specificities, men will never bring. So if you create the right conditions, you will create the condition for a complementary dynamic within the security sector, and therefore a better security sector. If we go to the domain in which I will be working very soon, which is the peace operations. We all know that women and children are the main victims of the conflict. Therefore, it does make sense to make sure that the units that are deployed for peace operations are composed of men and women, so that women will be able to talk to the women victims, because those latter are more inclined to share their experiences with the women that are in uniform. So having women also within the security sector will improve our operations in zone of conflict. It is also established that when you have women within a given security sector, these women can play the role of safeguard and prevent men to be involved in sexual abuses or wrongdoings related to gender-based violence or something. So you see that there are a lot of value added that we can have if we make sure that men and women are given the same opportunities to work within the security sector. It is important, before I move to now the methodology we should use for this integration, to all remember that gender integration is not only about women, it's about men and women. And this is extremely important. Yes, women have been lagging behind, so we need to undertake a positive action to make sure that they catch up, but we should avoid to forget the men's dimension in this gender integration. Now, how to do it? And I will go very fast.
No, General Diop, here's what I propose we do. I propose that we listen to the other opening statements and then come back to you to listen to your thoughts on your method, on the methodology.
That's perfect.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Um, Thank you for your excellent comments and also for your prayers for my parents. I really appreciate it.
Thank
So
you.
now we move to you, Dr. Jakana Thomas. Can you share with us your own opening statement?
Yes. First, I'd like to second General Diop's in sending his condolence and my condolence to you, Madam Abiola. And I'd also like to mention I'm really delighted to be included in this really important conference and on this particular panel. And I would like to just preface my statements by saying that all of the insights that I'm going to provide are as an academic, as opposed to as a practitioner with the kind of lived experience that the General McConnell will have. So I will say this focus of the panel and the conference on the Women, Peace, and Security agenda is incredibly important and timely because, as many panelists have noted since this morning, Africa is on the forefront of adopting these plans to implement 1325. And I think it's really important at this point to examine how these plans will actually be implemented. And the Women, Peace, and Security agenda's main aim is to generate a more inclusive peace and security. But what we need to question is what it means to be inclusive and examine the limits that we are currently imposing on what inclusion actually means. And so what I mean by this is that there's this widespread recognition that women's participation in political processes leads to stronger peace agreements, stronger post-conflict constitutions, and overall a more durable peace. But what we haven't really focused on are which women can and which women do contribute to this, right? There are actually a variety of women in societies with different interests, and therefore there's not actually a single women's agenda. And so it really begs the question of how important it is to include and consider a diverse set of women, right? And to consider the voices of women who might not necessarily be represented on a panel like this because they're not esteemed in the way that other panelists are. And so I would say more work needs to be done to understand how these different groups of women are actually going to impact these different political processes. And it's important and essential to recognize that women are not going to impact these processes in the same way, right? However, it's also important to recognize that all women do actually have a lot to contribute in every aspect. And so what this means is that we kind of need to look beyond just the groups of women that we tend to be comfortable considering. And so we tend to be more comfortable considering peace women, women in civil society, women's movements, or peace movements. And if we look at 1325, it specifically earmarks a role for women in peacekeeping and civilian women, but evidence from around the world continues to show that women are not just peace activists and they're not just civilians, they're also combatants, they're security officers, and they're members of militias. So what does this mean for the Women, Peace, and Security agenda in Africa? So I will just be brief in my remarks and say that it's important to consider, again, these women who don't already have pre-existing political access and think about what they would value and what they would need. And in some cases, what they prefer and what would be beneficial for them when we're thinking about the broad application of these national plans to implement this Women, Peace, and Security agenda. So what we know, evidence from Northeast Nigeria and Mali, for example, have shown us that women have participated and invested quite a lot in community defense and militia organizations, as well as in combatant roles within rebel organizations. And they've contributed to these processes in important ways. So in Nigeria, for example, it's become glaringly obvious that women have helped the CJTF in ways that men were actually unable to. They were able to search women in respectful ways, apprehend women within their homes, and really importantly, which I think is often overlooked, they had the ability to leverage their interpersonal communications and relationships with other women to extract information that actually was helpful in countering violent extremism. They were able to use their roles as mothers and neighbors and friends to deter young men, and in some cases, young women, from engaging in violent extremism through their parents and through their social connections. That's something men don't actually try to leverage as much as women do. And so when we think about what the value of including women in security apparatuses are, this is one of them. We've also seen evidence, as General Diop has mentioned, that when women in the CJTF, for example, were present in IDP camps, it deterred violence by militia members and peacekeepers, which is actually really important. So when women were there were fewer instances of targeting women and children and people who are vulnerable in these internally displaced people camps. And then I'll try to be really brief and say that there's also this fallacy when we think about who should participate in conflict resolution. And there's this argument that often says those who fight should actually be responsible for negotiating. And that's wrong in two different ways. One, because this idea that men are the only ones that fight is outdated, as we know right now, right? It's important to recognize that women are also participants in armed groups, again, in community-based security organizations, in civilian defense. And so if the argument is that if you fought the conflict, you should be at the negotiating table, well, there's one entry point. But then the second thing that we realize is that those people who fight in conflicts are not the only people that have a way forward. They're not the only ones that have the ability to generate viable conflict resolution plans. And so the last thing I will say is that there needs to be broader recognition that women are already participating in security in a variety of ways that tend to be unrecognized. So even in very conservative spaces like Tuareg women in northern Mali, they've expressed a deep and sincere interest in participating in the security sector. And in some ways they work toward this provision, but not necessarily bearing weapons, right? And a large majority of women have said that they'd be interested in doing so, but when they were not present, they tended to be hampered by security norms. And so one question is, what happens when we expand our conceptualization of who has the right to participate and have an active role in security? And what does that do? And then what happens when we start to recognize the diverse actors that already participate in security, but without being overtly recognized? And as we've seen in national and community level peace processes, women have contributed a lot by cooperating and collaborating across the aisle with other diverse actors, and they've helped to institute peace and lead to lasting peace. And so I think it's incredibly important to think about all of the different types of women who should be included in the Women's Peace and Security agenda, and think about what happens when we don't include all of those women and what potentials exist when we start to think about including more of these different types of women. So I really look forward to the Q&A, and I'll stop here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Those were really very useful remarks. And now we turn to our officer scholar, Colonel Diarra. Please, you have the floor.
Good afternoon again, and thank you for having me on this panel. I'm really delighted to be part of this Apsaco meeting. Thank you to all of the panelists also. So the topic today I'll try to develop is regarding gender and security. And as you said earlier that I'm from Mali, and I'm trying to focus on the gender integration in the armed forces in Mali. So, as we know, Mali has been facing a difficult security, political, and institutional situation. We have experienced since 2012 3 different coup d'etat, and the country is almost not official, but it is different. It is divided in several zones and parts. The north part of the country is controlled by insurgents, the center by terrorists, and in the south, the political, military, and religious leaders are not able to stabilize the country for now. So the country has been also facing for a long time bad governance, poverty, fragility of institutions, corruption, unemployment, and illiteracy. And even basic access to social service is difficult, water, electricity, and healthcare. So you can see that women and young girls are mostly the victim of those situations. In Mali, women are 54.5% of the global population. Therefore, the feminization of the womanization of the army and the security forces is linked to the evolution of the Malian society. Today, you can say that women are fully integrated in all the military sectors, but not still enough. A complete security sector reform is required to fully take care of their needs. So, we're talking about women, and we're talking about gender and sexual specificity. You know that gender is linked to the roles, the attitude, the behaviors, and social values of men and women. Sex refers to biological difference between men and women. So in Mali, security sector reform includes both the military forces, the gendarmerie, the police, the intelligence services, the custom, the judiciary, and the penitentiary branches. So security sector reform is defined as a political and technical process to improve the security of the state and human security. So to understand what is happening now, we need to go back to the history of Mali. You know, Mali was independent in 1960. And just before the independence in 1963, the former president, Modibo Keita, created the first commission for women. Then in 1968, General Moussa Traoré appointed several women as ministers with the UNFM, National Union of Women, which one linked to the National Political Party. In 1991, with the democracy, new principles were edicted. We talk about principle of equity, non-discrimination, human rights, individual freedom between men and women. So in 2011, we adopted the National Gender Policy. In 2015, there is a law who aimed at facilitating access of women to appointment and elective positions with a quota of 30%. This law is diversely exercised. But even with those efforts, women are still not well represented in the decision-making instance and diplomatic representation in Mali. So since 1960, only one woman has been appointed prime minister in 2012, Madame Cissé, Madame Kaidama, and only 55 women have been appointed ministers in general. So now we come to women, defense, and security. We can see that since the creation of the army in 1960, on October 10th of October 1960, mostly men have been enlisted in the army because the army was considered as a men issue. So, but we started, women started joining the army in the 1970s at the military health service. And today, one of the first women who integrated this service is general. It's called General Kani Jabate. In 1985, 9 young women formed the first batch of what they call women personnel of the army, personnel féminin des armées, they appelled PFAT. And in 1966, those pioneers were trained and put on the track. Today, women represent 6.7% of the army, but they are not still on the field. Only few of them are tank and heavy truck drivers and mechanics. Most of them work in offices like secretaries, nurses, journalists. But only few of them have volunteered to be on the battlefield, like Colonel Noma Segara was well known, and Fatoumata Kone Berthe. So now we can see that they are fully integrated and they can even put aside an autonomous regiment. Regarding this integration, we can say that the police forces are the most advanced. We can see that women had been recruited in 1965 in the intelligence service with Chekoro Bagayo. And now they are almost everywhere. They represent 12% of the police forces. There are today 45 senior and general officers, 50 inspectors, and more than almost 800 warrant officers. The National Gendarmerie, the first gendarmettes came in 2003, and I had the pleasure to do the first study of the feminization of the gendarmerie, since I'm a gendarmerie officer. And now, the first batch, most of the most ranked are lieutenant colonel, and they work both in investigation sectors and in anti-riot units. Also, we can notice that at In the custom service, they are 22%. In the prison management, they are 15%. So you can see that today, women and men are treated equally. Promotion criteria are the same, but women have the choice to go or not to go on the battlefield. So you can see also that today the criminality is more and more feminized. We can see more and more women who are criminals. Therefore, we need more women in the law enforcement units. So also, we are trying to develop armed forces to be attractive for women. A quota of 10% is dedicated, therefore. But unfortunately, some of them are victims of sexual harassment. So that's why we are trying to strengthen trainings with the help of European Union, MINUSMA, who's on the ground here, DCAF and MP. So I'll stop here for now, and I will propose how more we can improve security sector reform in armed forces. Thank you for the audience.
Thank you, Colonel Diarra, for your opening statement, which gave us a lot of important information. And we will come back to you in the follow-up. Now to you, Jonna.
Thank you.
So, Jonna, is it Dr. Naumanen?
I'm of course would appreciate the being elevated to doctor, but I only have a master's. So Jonna is fine.
Sorry, yes, I read your bio and I somehow, no, I'm forgiving. Nigerians are very bad about that. We always want to call everyone doctor, engineer, architect, something, So, Madam Jonna Naumanen, please share with us from your experience, your opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Abiola, and I'll take the doctors any day. May I also join my fellow panelists in expressing condolences. And I think at the same time, what you were reflecting very early on in this panel really demonstrate what feminists said decades ago, that personal is political, and certainly in field of security, this is equally so. And I think that is what also is very much driving the Women, Peace and Security mandate, and why there are so many women from civil society to those who work in security contexts and within security forces so passionate about this topic. Maybe I can reflect a little bit based on what I've been hearing also from the other panelists. I'm very passionate about the topic, obviously. And certainly I've seen lots of evidence, especially in the past years, of how women's participation enhances operational effectiveness. It enhances force protection. It enhances military intelligence to start with. You have better outreach in the field. Women, for example, in a lot of, if I think of my anthropological studies, women tend to have a network that extends more across the countries, because women tend to be the ones who move to men's homes, not the other way around. So they have their sisters and their family members in different villages. And if that security information is not captured then from them, the military will not have a full information on the terrain, and they won't be able to meet women's security needs as well. But this is, of course, also a responsibility for men. And I recall from my time when I was working still with the Office of Military Affairs, I looked at the statistics. And in Mali, there was one female peacekeeper for 5,500 square kilometers. One female peacekeeper per 4,000 square kilometers in Congo. So we can't leave that important task for women. It really needs to be hammered into the institutional culture of also the men military members. It's their responsibility. It's part of their job to provide security for women as much as for the men. At the same time, of course, women's participation in military is, for us, I work currently at the OSCE and the Office of Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. And in a democratically governed society, we've recognized that military personnel have human rights. So they are citizens in uniform, and with that, they have certain restrictions or rights, but they still have human rights, and with that, they also have labor rights. And then if you look at things like non-discrimination, this applies to military personnel. So we need to start building armed forces where that human rights culture is fully ingrained in them, because it's only from the culture that it comes also to the operations. You cannot have operational theater where you're meeting all the human rights needs if you don't already have it in your institutional culture. So the institutional reform, for me, is the key part where that change needs to start happening. And then if we think of very practical matters, it comes down to uniforms, whether uniforms fit women. If you don't have a helmet that fits them or safety gear that fits women's bodies, you will send them to an operational terrain where their lives are much more in danger than for men. In Western militaries, I know they sometimes provide, for example, I remember recently reading about underwear being provided for women for the first time, and I thought, so hang on, men got this all the time. Imagine if men military had been providing only women's underwear, it would have been a major disaster. So we have those very practical aspects, but there's also policy level issues, such as like maternity and paternity policies. Are men able to also be fathers to their children when they participate into military? Because that's part of that culture that creates equality as well. Are women able to breastfeed their children, or are their fitness standards so rigid that they need to get into a super shape very soon and they won't be able to take care of their newborn babies? So there are a whole lot of these policy level things that we need to start wrapping before we start talking about numbers. And one of the most key ones, and I think this has been, of course, also referred to, is that of harassment and sexual violence and sexual abuse within the institutional cultures. There's very few countries that really look at data on this topic, that really investigate what is happening at different levels. And those who do, and those who really measure this, we've seen that, for example, for PTSD, for post-traumatic stress disorder, quite often the women military members get it often from the behavior they experience within their own troops, instead of from being in operations. And this is quite concerning already in itself, but it also tells that then if you are a commander, you are having a major issue down your command. And if you don't manage that issue, you don't have a very operationally ready unit. Because if you have a case of harassment, case of abuse, that unit is not operationally capable. They are not trusting each other. They are not able to function and perform in their military duties or in their policing duties the way should be. So if anything, this is one of the key issues, I would say, for military leadership, for commanders to address and for them to set that tone, but also for men within the military to really not take part in it or actually actively take part in preventing it, into addressing it, because it affects the men too, even the men who are not necessarily victims, while also men may be victims also of the sexual harassment and sexual violence within the military. But even if they are not, they also need to operate in these units that are then dysfunctional. So I think overall, as I say, this is, for me, this is it's a leadership issue. We need much better policies. We need much better data to even start unpacking that within the military, to really transform that institutional culture. I'll leave that here because I know we'll have a space for then more for questions and further reflections. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Madam Jonna, for those excellent remarks. You know, so we've come to the point where we can listen more, we can talk more, and we're already getting many questions. So I'm going to have us go through another tour of our panelists, but I wanted to share the questions that have come in so that when you want to, perhaps General Diop, you're going to talk about methodology. I don't know, Dr. Thomas, what you would like to now zoom in on based on your opening remarks, but as you do that, I'd like you to keep in mind some of the questions that came in and then see how you can answer them in the course of your next statements. So we have three main questions. The first says, we tend to speak on including more women in the security sector. Are the structures more amenable to women? I actually think that, Madam Jonna, you were talking about this, in that these are the structures more amenable to women. How do we reinforce the political will at the highest level to take issues of gender equality beyond mere representation? I think this is very, very important. And we need to discuss it. I also think actually that you, Dr. Thomas, a lot of the work you've done has been around this issue. You know, you have like when Colonel Diarra was speaking, he was talking about 6.7% of women in the army in Mali. But in many of these combatant groups, I don't know if the proportion is closer to 30%, if you can share with us, if you know if women are better represented in those community associations that are for security. And you know, I was reading some of your work and some of your research, and in that research, it said that these women join these associations. They play a role. They're fighting. They're in the front lines. But the understanding of women as equal, the understanding of women doesn't change in this even among their peers. Even among their peers, they have women with guns who are there fighting alongside them. And the men don't go to sleep thinking, no, the world has changed, the women are now equal. They don't, this is not happening. So, I mean, Dr. Thomas, do you have any information about how we can nudge that along, that awareness along? What can we be doing? And then a second question is, women in the military still suffer from negative stereotypes. And I think, you know, when there's 6.7%, that would be so easy to suffer from negative. I mean, because you're such a minority at 6.7%. And Colonel Diarra, even your 10% is still a minority. I think we need to be seeing how we push to 20. What we can do, you know, and what we can do to encourage all the countries to push towards 20. And so the question is, women in the military still suffer from negative stereotypes and resistance against their inclusion, especially in decision-making positions. How do you change the perception inside and outside the national security architecture? And General Diop, you probably have a lot of insight into this because you've been at the very top levels in Senegal. You're reporting directly to the president. So please tell us what can be done. And then the last question, the adoption of a continental peace and security architecture has been viewed positively in terms of preventive diplomacy, mediation, and peace support operations. But how to reach greater flexibility for the incorporation of methods to address emerging political and security issues, such as election-related violence, piracy, terrorism, and how can we incorporate the security sector reforms and transitional justice while the gender gap is not yet a matter of emergency, namely at the domestic level? So I don't know if you got all those three questions. I will post them in the chat so that it will make it easier for everyone. But I think these are excellent questions, especially for me, especially the last question. You know, January came and Africa welcomed the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. But General Diop, Colonel Diarra, I want you to know that I think without a continental peace and architecture and security architecture, it's not going to be easy to have a one market in Africa. So if you can also lend yourselves your thoughts to that last question, I would really appreciate it. So we start with you, General Diop. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. That's why I say, Mrs. Abiola, that this topic is about our future. It's about our security as a humanity. It's about our stability and our development. Coming back to the numbers, it is important, yes, to make sure that the percentage of women present in the security sector is higher and higher, but let us make sure that we have a meaningful presence of women and avoid to just check the box and say we have this number. No, this is not the point. Let's make sure that we do it in a gradual manner because it is a cultural change. We know that the security sector is a very masculine sector. And we have more many of our colleagues that are not convinced that we should go with the speed people are talking about. So to me, we need to go gradually. Stop very often, evaluate what we have done, reorient and readapt. Because it's about mindset change. It's about cultural change, and culture takes time to change. I'm not saying we should drag our feet, but we should not be in a hurry. There is a compromise that is possible. We should also make sure that we undertake the right communication strategy, because it's about convincing people. So let's make sure that we identify the relevant stakeholders that can serve as relay for our message. Those who are against, why are they against? We should not be in confrontation with them. We should be listening to them and understand why they're reluctant and work with them to change their position. It is extremely important. And to do that, there is what we call the stakeholder analysis to understand who are in favor, who are against, who are neutral, and develop a strategy based on the targets we are focusing on. And it is also very important to conceptualize what we are doing, to take time to do the theory of what we want to do. Take time to write the strategies, the literature, because as the academics say, when it is not well conceptualized, it is very difficult to be put in practice. But the strategies and the normative documents should be gender sensitive. That's very important. The strategies, the concepts, the doctrines, they're necessary, but they should also be gender sensitive. And one advantage having these documents is that we can sometimes stop and evaluate if we are on the right track or not. That's one very important interest. And the gender dimension should also necessitate training. We need to undertake training because it's a science. You are not born with all the skills that are necessary to have this, what we call the binary approach, which allows you, whenever you take a decision, to consider the woman's sexual specificities and the man's sexual specificities. You have to learn that, like all other sciences. So we need to undertake a good training strategy for decision makers, for people who are at the operational level, but also for the tacticians. And finally, women should take the lead of this endeavor. I used to say that who better than women can speak for themselves? If women do not speak for themselves, if women do not say clearly what they want to see happening, someone else will do it on their behalf. But unfortunately, this one will do it the wrong way. So it is for women also to be at the forefront of this endeavor and speak for themselves, make sure that they are listened to, they are understood, and they see what they want be implemented. Those are the things I would like to share before coming back to the questions. And I will not finish without, please, saying that let's avoid the cut and paste. Yes, we can learn from the others because there are always opportunities to learn from the others. But we need to make sure that what we learn from others is well contextualized and adapted to our own realities. Thank you very much.
General Diop, really outstanding, your comments. Really outstanding.
Thank you.
So I feel really so inspired to know that you're playing this critical role that you've just been appointed to play at the United Nations.
Thank you very much. I need your support.
You have it. You have
Thank
it.
you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Dr.
you.
Thomas, to you.
Yes, thank you for posing these very interesting questions. So I'll say to the last point that General Diop made is that there's this, I think there's a challenge here where we want to be progressive, we want to move, we want to integrate, but then at the same time, there's like, slow down, we can't do it, but we have to listen to women. The problem is that in order to get women listened to, they have to be in a position of power, and they have to be in a position where they are respected. And unfortunately, it's hard to do that from the outside. And it's really important that they're inside at the table. And unfortunately, that sometimes means maybe moving a little bit faster than our culture is comfortable with, or that we're comfortable with. And so, I mean, I guess directly to the question that you proposed to me, is that we have seen in non-state armed groups, there's a lot more movement toward women's inclusion, and they're doing it already. Women are already doing security. So it's not as if they don't know how to do it. Women do it in community security, like security organizations, especially in situations with hybrid security where the state is one actor, but there are also these other community defense organizations providing security. We see women doing security. They're engaging in meaningful security work. And so I think part of the question of part of the reason it's so difficult to continue to advance this agenda is that there's a lot of I guess, doubt about women's capabilities and abilities to do this. And I think it's very important to note that they are already doing it in other contexts, right? And so it's not that they're not able, it's just that we are not able to see their value in these roles. And so I fully agree with your statements, General Diop, that you need to walk before you can run, but at some point you have to be pushed to start walking, right? And so I think that this is a situation you're in that you can't just all of a sudden have parity, right? 50% men, 50% women, because you're not there yet, but something has to give where you're willing to start moving in that direction. And I think it's really impressive that you're already thinking about what those things are. And maybe those things need to come just a little bit faster because women really do have a lot to contribute. So back to the other question about, so just because women are integrated doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be respected there either, right? Because we've seen, especially in non-state armed groups, where there's this willingness to use women's labor and then to deny it later. In many revolutions, in the Biafran militia, for example, women did all kinds of things. They secured their villages, they went and got food, they did so many things. And then at the end of the conflict, it was like, they were never here, they didn't really do that, it didn't happen. And they just go back to where they were. And this is in so many contexts where women's labor is unseen and unacknowledged, which then allows them to say, well, women are not security actors because we refuse to see them as such. And so I think there's some of what has to happen is that there needs to be data that's collected on all of these dimensions. And this data needs to be made public and it needs to be readily accessible. And I think part of the problem is that the people like academics, like myself, who are collecting this data are not necessarily in the room speaking to the people who need to see these data. And these conversations are not really happening across these dimensions in the way that they need to be. And so I know I've spent a large part of my career thus far collecting data on these questions about where women are in rebel groups or women are in community defense organizations. And I'm here, but so many other people are doing the same kind of work and they are not necessarily showing that women have been there and they're not talking to the right people. And so I think one thing one easy way to solve this is having the people who are collecting the data and doing these analyses matched up with the stakeholders and the policy makers and practitioners. That needs to happen on both sides. And I think that that's one of the conversations that's increasingly difficult to have because, academics tend to silo themselves off and only speak to themselves, which is not actually that helpful. And so all of that to say, I think that it's really important to recognize that we're not starting from scratch. We're not reinventing the wheel because the wheel has already been created. We just need to see it. And we need to see how women in these contexts, for example, in local community-based armed groups, can be how we can learn from that for these national structures. And as we know with, again, in Nigeria, there is a relationship between the civilian joint task force and the actual joint task force, right? And so these things are not necessarily separable. They're not necessarily separate, yet somehow they operate separately. And the knowledge is not necessarily transferred, and that may go both ways. So thank you for these questions. They're very interesting and important.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. I really liked essentially what you're saying is that we have to force people to face reality. That maybe it's not so much that we're so conservative, it's just that we refuse to see how much progress we're making. You know, the women are already there doing so many things at different levels, and we just need to integrate them maybe into more formal systems.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you.
So Colonel Diarra, over to you. Colonel Diarra, I want you to know that when I went to Mali a month ago, and it was my very first time to visit your incredible country. And I just thought, this is the country where 800 years ago, the wealthiest man in the world was from there. You know, and now you were talking about the poverty and the poor governance and the big challenges. I hope you're going to share with us some ideas about how we're transforming all of that in Mali.
Thank you, Dr. Abiola. As you say, I'm also from Nigeria, since I spent almost 5 years in Nigeria and Abuja, so I'm fond of this country, and I know everybody's daughter, professor, and so on. So you said you visited Mali quite a while ago, and unfortunately, Kankou Musa went with all our gold and went to sell it and to give out it to all over the world. But to be more serious, I think, as I said, we have a serious problem of governance. It's a governance issue, because this country is one of the wealthiest countries in Africa. You can see, we know that in the northern part of the country, we have underground resources which are not being exploited yet. And, you know, there is a crisis there for almost 60 years. And, you know, wherever there is a crisis, there are some underground wealth. So I think with a good leadership, good governance, we can sort out our country for this poverty, illiteracy, and all those evil things. So I hope that this transition, Mali political transition, and the next election will give us the opportunity to create what they call in Mali here the new Mali, with new leaders committed to Africa, committed to world governance, committed to tradition, and so that we can help sustain and develop our country. So to go back to the topic, you say that you can notice that in the case of Mali, women, most of the women are not combatants. They are used like support, especially with jihadists, because there are a lot of terrorists and jihadists in our country. They are used for intelligence collection, and they are used for like laundry, and unfortunately for sexual labor and abuses. So to answer to the first question, for me, we can improve all the situation by synthesizing political and military elites so that they can take in account gender. They can own it. They can be more aware of it and can have more ownership. So also we need to develop national and regional gender policies. You say that, okay, the quota of 10% is still very low. In fact, it's even not an official quota, it's a kind of tradition. Whenever there is a recruitment, they say, okay, let us put 10% of women. No, we can push it. As General Diop said, it's not about figures, but I think we need to recruit dedicated human resources, especially women. I know I've been trained with women when I was in the cadet school, when I was in the officer school, and some women are amazing. Some women are amazing. They are strong, they are morally capable, and they are hardworking. But we don't have only to put women for the sake of having women, but we need to have valuable women, as you said earlier. So also we need to recruit those women in all the security sector. That means, as I said, the police is a good example today in Mali, but we need to strengthen all the sectors, the military, gendarmerie, the custom, and so on and so forth. So also, in general, there is no career plan in our army, especially in the male army. And we need to develop a specific career plan for the women in all the security sectors. And also, finally, I think we have to criminalize gender-based violence. Because, in the military and the security sector, gender-based violence is considered as a kind of taboo. It happened between warrant officers, it happened between officers. We experienced a case not long ago. So we need to say that, okay, we are equals, but women are considered like a treasure for me. So we need to valorize them, we need to value them. So finally, you say that the last question, adoption of continental peace and security architecture. Yes, indeed, this is a nice plan. Me, I'm a former staff of ECOWAS, and we operationalized the ECOWAS standby force. And it was one of the most example of architecture. But when we face the crisis in Côte d'Ivoire, it was the first attempt for the ECOWAS standby force. And then in Mali, we said that so we have still have some lapses, and we need to fill them. So that's why the Continental Army is still a dream, but I think we have to go for that and to take one out. And to conclude, I can say that feminization and integration of gender in the security sector is a long process, and they are linked to the emancipation of women. In fact, as you said, women are powerful. Today, public authorities should be more sensitized, and the women also have to prove that they are valuable. You cannot just say, okay, I'm a woman, that I should have all the facilities. No, you need to be to fight. It's not even a matter of men or women. You need to see like human beings and say, okay, this person is valuable, so let's take this person for the sake of his value, not for being a man or a woman. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Colonel Diarra. My prayer is that, in the next few decades, through our work, strengthening the security in Africa, we can start having the wealthiest people in the world again coming from Africa. But I don't even want the wealthiest individuals. I want a prosperous continent. We can get to that through this work. And that brings me to you, Madam Jonna. You've worked so much on training, and you've integrated how to make the UN systems have gender reflected in the training. General Diop, Colonel Diarra, they've talked about not having women just to have women, but to have women that are really competent. You've worked on this. What can you share with us, as well as all the other questions? And don't worry, you are having the final word, because I see we're kind of getting close to time.
Thank you very much. Wow, a final word. I must say, I'm very impressed by getting a lot of food for thought also myself in this panel. It's been very interesting, engaging. I think for me, this comes down to acknowledging, of course, that we women are the ones whose voices are the most powerful here. But those voices need to be given space. And normally the most powerful in the societies are not the women. Currently, it's mostly men. So those men need to be able to provide that space, and they do need to provide that platform, and they need to listen to those women and give that floor for the women to speak. Otherwise, women can be shouting as much as they want from the sidelines, but if they are not listened to, and if they're not facilitated to take part in that discussion, that discussion will be had in very specific circles, and it's not useful. I think in terms of, you look at higher level leaderships, and of course, I think of this often in military structures, in international law, commanders are responsible, of course, of their own actions, but they're also responsible of actions of their troops. So if somebody down their ranks who they command commit violations, they're also accountable to this. So the justice systems need to take this into account, and you really need to ingrain this into military education. And through this, start building that responsibility of all the troops in responding to the, taking gender equality seriously, taking gender-based violations seriously, both committed by the troops outside as well as internally. Ultimately, also what is very important, if you think of more structural changes, also what is the role of the oversight? And is there an independent oversight that supports the military structures in making these reforms? And what is the role of the independent oversight? Is it parliamentary oversight? Is there independent ombuds institutions that have a good communication structures with the military commanders? And are they able to also support the military structures in making reforms that facilitates women's involvement in the military? And we need to kind of also try to ourselves always get away from this thinking that being a good soldier means being a Captain America, so this kind of like super strong man, because military needs all kinds of skills, and it needs brain power, and it needs analysis and intelligence, and those comes in all forms and sizes and shapes and everything else. So there's a lot of internal reflections we all need to do constantly, no matter what our positions are. So those are maybe my few key highlights. And of course, if we think of education, that the education needs to start being more than just one course on women, peace and security, or one course that looks at these international frameworks, but ideally it needs to look at operational contexts. It needs to build on scenarios where military themselves need to analyze, do they have currently the capabilities to meet the scenario contexts? And oftentimes, if you build gender well in it, it's very likely that through internal analysis, the people being trained themselves realize we actually need ourselves train on analyzing gendered risks, security risks. We ourselves need to look at how we are manned or where our personnel are. That's maybe my very few concluding considerations. Thank you.
So I would like to just thank all the panelists. I think I've not seen that maybe, I think we're out of time, but Madam Alawi is not saying anything to me. So perhaps, Madam Alawi, are we out of time? We're out of time. We are done. Okay, so I just want to thank all of you for your excellent contributions, and I want to wish you well, General Diop. Your success is Africa's success. It's all our success. We're a continent that has been really on the back foot of history for such a long time. So much is resting on your shoulders to help solve this problem of conflict and security, because I think that the key indicator of being on the back foot is this issue. And when we can solve this issue, we can begin to make progress. So thank you so much to the incredible audience that sent the outstanding questions, that have been with us throughout this conversation. I hope we continue to have this conversation through the support of the Policy Center for the New South, because it has to be an ongoing dialogue so that we see what more we can do to strengthen people like General Diop, like Colonel Diarra. And thank you, Dr. Thomas, for your work. And Ms. Jonna, I'm hoping that General Diop does take you up on your offer and incorporates you in the work that he's doing, because I can see that you have a lot to contribute. So thank you, everyone. And let's meet again, hopefully after COVID, in the beautiful country of Morocco, and really do a 4-hour session and dive deep into this problem and come up with even more recommendations and solutions. Until then, take care and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
إلى مركز